Have you ever found yourself awake in the quiet hours before dawn, heart heavy, thoughts racing, and a silence so deep it almost aches? It's in those moments when the world is still and your soul is loud that a question rises. Does anyone see me? Does anyone hear this silent cry? And the answer, though often hidden in stillness, is unwavering. Yes, God sees your pain and He hears your cry. We like to believe we are the masters of our fate, the keepers of our own destiny, the planners, the problem solvers, the fixers. From an early age we are taught to take responsibility, to chart a course, to plan for contingencies, to ensure every loose end is tied, every risk managed, every outcome accounted for. This habit, born of necessity and reason, slowly evolves into an illusion, one that convinces us we are in control of everything we hold dear. We walk through our days with brows furrowed in effort, minds spinning with calculations and anxieties, always one step ahead or one step behind. We worry ourselves into exhaustion, believing that if we let go, even for a moment, everything might fall apart. But beneath all this motion lies a deeper truth we often resist. We are not in control, not in the way we think. The illusion of control is perhaps one of the most persistent and subtle lies we tell ourselves. It masquerades as responsibility, as maturity, even as love. We worry over people because we care. We stress over details because we want things to go well. But at some point, our concern morphs into burden, and our burden into bondage. We begin to carry things we were never asked to carry. We try to hold up the entire weight of our lives as if our will alone were enough to sustain the universe. And when it all becomes too much, when the load presses down and we begin to buckle beneath it, we feel we've failed, not because we were weak, but because we thought we were meant to be strong in ways we were never designed to be. There is something deeply humbling about reaching the end of our own strength. It is not the kind of humbling that leads to shame, but the kind that strips away falsehood. When we come face to face with our limitations, not as a theory, but as an undeniable experience, we begin to glimpse a different kind of power, one not rooted in self-reliance, but in surrender. It is only when we reach the edge of ourselves that we start to ask the deeper question. What if I'm not meant to do this alone? What if this burden belongs not in my hands, but in the hands of someone who sees further, knows deeper, and holds steadier? There is quiet wisdom in letting go, not the careless letting go of indifference, but the intentional release of trust. It is the soul's acknowledgement that there are forces at work beyond what we can see, and a providence that does not falter simply because we cannot trace it. To leave something in God's hands is not to give up, but to give over. It is to stop pretending we are the architect of every outcome and to begin walking in the peace that comes when we know we are not alone in the building. This is not a call to passivity or irresponsibility. It is not the abandonment of effort or the refusal to plan. Rather, it is the deep inner shift from striving to trusting, from controlling to cooperating with a will greater than our own. It means doing our part with diligence and care, but holding the results with open hands. It means walking forward without the crushing weight of needing to be certain about every detail. And it means recognizing that control, in its purest and most exhausting form, was never ours to begin with. We were made to live, not to tighten our grip until we tremble. We were made to walk in trust, not to run in fear. And when we begin to understand this, even dimly, a new kind of strength begins to rise in us, one not born of certainty, but of surrender. Pain often clouds the senses. It blurs the horizon and closes the heart inward. When suffering comes, whether through loss, fear, betrayal, loneliness, or 1,000 other shadows, it has a peculiar way of convincing the soul that it has been abandoned. And perhaps the most haunting ache is not the pain itself, but the quiet voice that whispers in the dark, "Where is God now?" This is not rebellion. It is the desperate cry of one who once felt held and now feels utterly alone. The stillness of suffering is not empty. It is full of questions, full of aching, full of silent pleas that seem to rise to heaven and return unheard. But to assume that God's silence is God's absence is to misunderstand the nature of his presence. There is a kind of presence that does not shout or shine. It does not dazzle or declare itself with trumpets. It moves in the background, often unnoticed until the storm has passed. Just as the roots of a tree do their strongest work beneath the surface, so often does divine care operate in the unseen. It does not always remove the pain, nor does it always explain it, but it remains. Pain can convince us that we are alone because we cannot feel what we once felt. We do not sense the warmth, the light, the clarity that once came so easily. But feelings are not the measure of reality, and the absence of emotion is not the absence of God. Sometimes God hides not to forsake us, but to purify the love we offer. When everything is clear and bright, it is easy to trust. When we feel comforted, reassured and safe, belief is simple. But when those signs are taken away and the heart is left with nothing but a choice to believe or not, then the soul begins to grow. It is in these dark stretches that trust becomes less about emotion and more about allegiance. Will you still reach upward when your arms feel empty? Will you still say, "You are good," when the night does not lift? This is not the test of doctrine, but of devotion. It is not about proving yourself to God, but about discovering how deeply rooted your faith truly is. Many people imagine divine nearness as a feeling, a sensation, a warm comfort, but the truth is often far more mysterious. God does not always comfort in the ways we expect. He does not always answer as quickly or as clearly as we desire. But he is not unmoved. He is not deaf. He is not indifferent. In fact, it is in the moments of greatest silence that he may be closest, not removing the pain, but entering it with us. There is something sacred about a love that does not fix, but stays. A love that does not explain, but embraces. A love that does not vanish in the storm, but chooses to sit in it beside us. This kind of love cannot always be understood in the moment. It does not always comfort the intellect, but it slowly forms a new kind of peace, one not dependent on circumstances or clarity, one that rests not in the removal of sorrow, but in the unwavering presence of one who holds all things together. In time, many who walk through the fire look back and realize they were never truly alone. Though they did not see him, they see now how they were sustained, upheld, carried. And the pain, though still remembered, becomes something more than sorrow. It becomes holy ground, evidence of a mystery that does not abandon us, even when we do not understand its silence. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when words are no longer enough. Logic runs dry, arguments lose their power, and the well of human striving begins to crack. It is here, in the deep and weary places of the heart, that surrender first whispers its invitation. Not a dramatic collapse, not a grand pronouncement, but a quiet turning inward, a breath drawn not in certainty but in trust. To surrender is to loosen the grip on what was never yours to control, to finally open the clenched hand and admit, "I cannot carry this alone." It is not the act of giving up, as many think. but rather the decision to give over, to place what is most precious into hands that are not your own, yet far more capable. This surrender does not come easily. We are taught to fight, to persist, to never back down. Surrender sounds too much like defeat, too close to failure. But there is a strength in it that surpasses the strength of will. It is the strength of yielding, the kind of power found in letting the current carry you rather than thrashing against the tide. No amount of thinking or planning can calm certain storms. It is in these moments that the soul must choose. Continue grasping at what only breaks in your hands, or let go and fall into the arms of something greater. To surrender to God is to accept the mystery, not to demand that every answer be given, not to wait for perfect clarity, but to say, even in this, I trust you. It is a form of love that moves beyond emotion, a love rooted not in what is felt, but in what is believed. This is the kind of trust that grows in the shadows, not in the light. It is born in uncertainty, in waiting, in the painful silence that tests the heart's resolve. And yet those who surrender often speak of a strange peace that follows, not because their pain disappeared, but because they no longer bore it alone. Surrender does not remove the wound, but it transforms the way we hold it. It becomes less of a weight and more of a passage. Through surrender, suffering is not glorified, but it is redeemed. Even the most broken pieces of life can become vessels of grace when placed in the hands of the divine. There is a gentleness in those hands, even when they are unseen. They hold without crushing, heal without rushing, guide without forcing. To place your burdens there is not to be rid of responsibility, but to walk forward without the paralyzing fear that everything depends on you. Many resist surrender because they fear losing themselves. But the paradox is that only in surrender do we begin to find who we truly are. We stop being the frantic builders of our own identity and begin to live as those who are known, carried, and called. There is freedom in that identity. Freedom from performance, from pressure, from the endless race to prove our worth. Surrender reveals a deeper truth, that you are not loved because of what you hold together, but because of who holds you together. And so, when surrender comes, perhaps in the quiet of the night, perhaps in the stillness after tears, it does not thunder or flash, it simply rests. It rests in the knowledge that though the way ahead is unknown, it is not unattended. That even in the most fractured moments, there is one who sees, who understands, who walks alongside. Surrender is not the end of striving, but the beginning of being led. There is something deeply moving about the knowledge that you are seen, truly seen, not just in your strengths, your successes, or the moments when you wear your bravest face, but in the silent aches of your heart, in the tears no one else witnesses, in the weight you carry without complaint. In the hidden rooms of your soul, where pain takes shelter, there is one who walks uninvited and unannounced, not to expose, but to comfort, not to judge, but to stay. When we say that God sees your pain and hears your cry, it is not poetic exaggeration or empty comfort. It is a truth that stands even when everything else crumbles. We are often careful with our wounds. We wrap them tightly, conceal them from others, even from ourselves, because the world teaches us that vulnerability is weakness. So we learn to smile through sadness, to speak lightly when our hearts are heavy, to keep walking while something inside us has long since sat down. Yet none of this deceives the eyes of God. The pain you hide from everyone else, He sees. The prayers you cannot form into words, He hears. the sighs, the silences, the nights when sleep does not come and mornings that feel like burdens, these are not unnoticed in heaven. And perhaps that is where healing begins, not always with the fixing of the pain, but with the quiet awareness that you are not alone in it. God's awareness is not distant or clinical. It is not the gaze of a cold observer, but the tender knowing of one who has walked among the hurting. There is no agony you feel that has not echoed in the heart of the divine. And so when you are at your lowest, when you feel most forgotten, that is often when you are most closely held. There is something sacred in the valley, not because it feels good, but because it becomes the place where masks fall away, where all the pretending ceases, and where the soul finally says, "This is me as I am." And in that rawness, that sacred honesty, divine love does not retreat, it leans in. So often we measure being heard by the speed of the answer. We assume that if there is no change, no visible relief, then our cries have been ignored. But silence is not absence, and waiting is not neglect. Sometimes God hears us best when we speak from the deep places, when we have nothing polished to offer and only our brokenness to give. The cry of the soul is not wasted, it is gathered, it is treasured. In time, it may return to you as strength, as wisdom, as peace. But in the moment of crying out, even when nothing changes outwardly, something is happening within, something real, something eternal. There are times when others may not understand what you're going through. Even the most compassionate friends can miss the mark, can speak too quickly or offer answers when all you needed was presence. But God's presence does not misstep. He does not rush to fix when He knows you need to be held. He does not offer cliches, He offers Himself. And in that presence, something shifts. Not always the pain itself, but the way it is carried. To be seen by God is not just to be observed. It is to be known without pretense, to be valued without performance. And to be heard by Him is not merely to have your words acknowledged, but to have your heart understood. This kind of seeing, this kind of hearing, it changes the way a person walks through suffering. It may not shorten the storm, but it anchors the soul in the truth that even here, even now, even in this, the God who formed you has not turned away. There is a peculiar power in letting go. Not the kind of letting go that signals despair or abandonment, but the surrender that comes from trust. Human nature clings tightly to control. We map our plans, shape our futures, hold our hearts with cautious hands, and build invisible fences around our hopes. We fear the uncertain, the unseen, the unanswered. So when life begins to shift, when the ground beneath us grows unsteady, we instinctively try to fix, to wrestle, to force a resolution. But there comes a time when the very act of holding on becomes the heaviest burden of all. And it is then that the whisper begins to rise. Leave it in His hands. This is not weakness, it is not laziness or denial. It is courage in its most sacred form. Because to place something in God's hands means acknowledging that His wisdom is greater than your understanding, His timing more precise than your urgency, His love more expansive than your fears. It means placing what is most fragile, your grief, your questions, your longing, into the hands of one who does not tremble. It means loosening your grip, not because you don't care, but because you finally believe that He does. The truth is, our striving often disguises our fear. We run ourselves into exhaustion trying to fix what is beyond us, and when nothing changes, we blame ourselves for not doing enough. But there are seasons in life when God does not ask for your strategy, He asks for your surrender. When He does not require your solution, only your trust. This is not a passive retreat, but an active choice to believe that the one who sees the end from the beginning is already working on your behalf, even in silence, even in delay, even in pain. To leave something in God's hands is to place it where it was always meant to be. It is to remember that you were never meant to carry every burden alone. It is to shift the weight of responsibility from your limited strength to His limitless grace, and as terrifying as it may be to release control, it is often only in that moment of release that peace begins to find its way in, not because your circumstances suddenly change, but because your soul no longer fights the storm alone. It may not make sense to others. People may look at your quiet surrender and see it as indifference, as giving up, as naivety, but you will know the truth in your spirit. You will know the calm that comes not from certainty, but from confidence, not in yourself, but in the faithfulness of God. You will learn that there is a stillness far deeper than any answer, a stillness that comes when you finally place your fear in the hands of one who is not afraid. Sometimes things must fall apart in your hands so they can be rebuilt in His. What you release, He can redeem. What you let go of, He can renew. And even the silence between your prayer and His answer is not empty. It is filled with His presence, His knowing, His gentle orchestration of what you cannot yet see. To live with open hands is to walk in a kind of freedom the world cannot give. It is to say, I trust you even now, especially now. And while the path ahead may still be unclear, your steps become lighter, because you are no longer walking as one who must bear it all, fix it all, carry it all. You are walking as one who knows that the safest place for what you love most is not your own understanding, but God's perfect care. In moments of stillness, when the noise of the world quiets and you are left alone with your thoughts, there is often a whisper that rises above the silence, a deep, unwavering sense that you are not forgotten. It is not a voice from the outside, but something deep within, as though eternity itself is speaking gently into your weariness. And what it says is simple: God is with you, not in some abstract, theological way, but truly, presently, and personally. The idea may seem small on the surface, but it contains a world of meaning. Because if God is with you, then you are never alone, no matter how empty the room feels, or how long the night lasts. It is in the hardest places that this truth becomes the most vital. When sorrow sits heavily on your shoulders, when fear coils itself around your thoughts, when disappointment leaves a hollow ache in your chest, that is where the presence of God becomes more than comfort. It becomes breath, strength, hope. Not a hope rooted in changing circumstances, but in the reality that the one who holds the stars is walking through the fire with you. He does not always remove the storm, but He never lets you face it alone. His nearness is not measured by the absence of pain, but by the sustaining of your soul through it. There are days when that presence feels far away. Prayers go unanswered, doors stay shut, and silence echoes like a canyon. But even in those moments, something in your spirit holds on, because deep down, something in you knows He is still there, watching, listening, carrying. The absence you feel is not neglect, but mystery. It is the mystery of a God who sometimes allows the darkness to linger, not to punish, but to grow something deeper in you. Trust that does not waver with circumstance, peace that does not collapse under pressure, and faith that does not depend on sight. To believe that God is with you is not to deny reality. It is not pretending that everything is fine or forcing a smile when your heart is breaking. Rather, it is the defiance of despair. It is choosing to say, even though I cannot see the way forward, I know I am not walking it alone. That belief does not make the road easier, but it gives you the strength to keep walking. It anchors your soul when everything else is shifting. It is the reason you can rise one more time, take one more step, breathe one more prayer. In the quiet moments, this presence becomes tangible, not through grand miracles, but through the smallest mercies. A word spoken at the right time, a memory that brings comfort, a sense of peace that arrives when it's most needed. These are not accidents, they are signs, reminders that you are held, that even when the world seems indifferent, heaven is attentive. That the one who knows you by name walks beside you, not above your suffering, but within it. And so, when you are tempted to believe that you are forgotten, remember that presence is not always loud. It doesn't always come with lightning or thunder. Sometimes it comes as a gentle whisper, a warmth in your chest, a stillness in your chaos. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all, and yet it changes everything, because the greatest miracle is not the removal of pain, but the nearness of God in the midst of it. That is where hope lives. That is where healing begins. That is where you will find the strength to endure, not because the burden is gone, but because you are no longer bearing it alone. So, in the quiet spaces of your pain, in the still hours of the night, when the world is asleep and your soul is wide awake, remember this: you are not unseen. Your tears are not wasted. Your cries are not echoing into a void. The burdens you carry, the wounds you hide, the questions you whisper into the dark, every single one is known by the one who formed your heart and listens for its tremble. To leave it in God's hands is not to give up. It is to give over. It is to trust that, even when life feels like fragments, He sees the whole. Even when you are overwhelmed, He is not. Even when you let go, He holds on. There is no shame in reaching the end of your strength. There is no defeat in saying, I can't do this alone. Because that is where faith begins, in the letting go, in the handing over, in the sacred surrender. He hears you, He sees you, He walks with you. And in the depths of that quiet knowing, you will find the courage to stand again. Not because everything is fixed, but because you are not alone in the waiting. And that changes everything.